So, you accidentally set off a time machine again, and now you're in 18th century Russia. Mix that with your too lazy to shave attitude, and you're forced into serfdom. Why, Vladimir? I don't know. Be quiet, I'm trying to help you. If you're gonna survive this predicament, you're gonna need to listen to me. Now, where was I? Okay, serfdom, yeah. Before we go any further, you're gonna need to know what exactly serfdom is. Serfdom was where a peasant was forcibly bound to the land. This meant that they would work the land of their lord without having the ability to leave. In essence, they were tied to the land and their movement was restricted. This practice is believed to have started in the 12th century, but eventually ends during the plague for Western Europe. Basically, serfdom was started because Russians were like, we need some cheap labor. Hey look, poor peasants suffering from another famine. Quick, let's go get them to work for us for measly crumbs. In reality, this transformation from peasants into a servile class took a few hundred years, but we don't have enough time for that right now. We're just trying to make sure you can survive. What, you want to know the difference between slaves and serfs? Do we really need... Alright, fine. Let me answer all your questions right now, so that I can get back to making sure you don't die in the Russian winter. Now, the main difference between serfs and slaves were how they were viewed in the eyes of the law. Slaves were, whatever way you looked at it, property of the master, meaning they could do whatever they want without any repercussions to them. On the other hand, serfs were people in the eyes of the law. Though they were bound to the land, they were also awarded some legal protections from the cruelties of their lord. Slavery in Russia is also really weird. Like, for example, they would enslave their own population. Literally, no one does that. With slavery, you usually bring in an outside group and enslave them instead. Another weird thing, and the main difference with Russian slavery, is that it was mostly voluntary. This is because the peasants wouldn't want to starve to death. Yeah, I know, Vlad, this is a really strange place. This won't last forever though. First of all, agricultural slaves were outlawed in 1679. Why? Well, obviously they realized the error of their ways and learned morality and compassion. Nah, it was because of taxes. Yep, serfs were required to pay taxes, but slaves weren't. So in order to avoid these taxes, some serfs would ask their lords to make them into slaves. After years of tax evasion, the government would eventually find out and make it so that every agricultural slave had to be a taxpayer too, effectively ending voluntary slavery. Moving on, the majority of Russian slavery was concentrated under household slaves, and this would not end until 1723, when it was abolished by Peter the Great. Why this time? Well, he made his way down the yellow brick road and to the Wizard of Oz, where he asked for emotions and a sense of morality. Nah, it was because of taxes again. Same trick, different star. The serfs in the What now, Vlad? You want a jacket? Right, just wait until I'm done explaining, please. You made me lose my train of thought, hold on. Serfs, slaves... Okay, so in Russia, what emerged in the 1300s was a sort of semi-slavery contract, where a Russian would sign a contract for a loan and agree to work to pay off the loan and its interest in a year. If he failed, he would become a slave. Now, flash forward to the mid-1400s, and Russia's in the middle of a civil war. The peasants who were holding debt began to flee to the church as they had more than enough land to go around. The church, in an effort to save money, asked the Tsar if they could limit the peasants' movements. They then declared that the peasants could only move locations on St. George's Day, which falls on November 26th. Now this is the snowball that starts it all. Soon, in 1497, this law gets applied to all free peasants. Almost 100 years later, in 1592, they even take away St. George Day, making the serfs now permanently bounded to the land. But wait, there's more. In 1649, a law code had finalized serfdom, as it now allowed not only the indefinite recovery of a fugitive serf, but also allowed the master to move the serf without his permission. Worst of all is that it made serfdom hereditary. So that would make your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, your great-great-grandkids, your great-great-great-grandkids, etc., into serfs. Alright, long story short, after a lot of exploitation, absolving nobles of their mandatory service, a couple revolts, and Russia getting absolutely mollywopped in the Crimean War, Tsar Alexander III finally abolished the practice of serfdom. Alright, now back to your situation, Vlad. There's a few different forms of serfdom. There are free peasants with no masters, but since you were forced into serfdom, we'll just forget about your freedom. You can be a state serf or a private serf too. State serfs would be preferable, because despite being bound to the land, they had a bit more freedom. Their master, as implied by the name, was the state. Sorry to get your hopes up again, Vlad, but since you didn't shave your beard, you're definitely going to end up as a private serf. Now, in private serfdoms, you got 4 options. The first option, you pay your rent to the lord, and he generally leaves you alone. This is probably the best option, as having the least amount of interaction with the master will spare you from his arbitrary rules. Another plus would be that you get to decide what you want to grow, besides wheat, since that's what you pay your master with. Option number 2, you get to be a farmhand. Essentially, you work 3 days on his farm, and then 3 days on your own. You get to pay your rent through your labor, but it is back-breaking work, and it also makes you a target for the cruelties of your master. Option number 3, you can work in a factory, but let me remind you, this is an 18th century factory. You'll be doing much more than just assembling toys for Toys R Us. These factories were nightmarish sweatshops. Some serfs actually think this is worse than the last option. Do with that information as you will. Now the final and worst option is being a household serf. This puts you in direct contact with the master and makes you the main target for his cruelties. Cruelties may include, but are not limited to, beatings, torture, onerous tasks, and possibly sexual violence. You know, just stuff you generally want to avoid. So Vlad, now that you know all this, is this probably a good time to tell you? You won't have a say in anything. Your master will decide for himself which form of labor you'll pay him through. Whatever it is, I wish you luck, Vlad. Vlad? Hello? Where'd you go? Did you get transported back? Oh well, at least you learned something. Anyway, I guess the main difference between peasants, serfs, and slaves is that peasants are citizens, while serfs are like the lowest of lower class Russians, and slaves are just seen as property, to be used however is seen fit. Whatever the case may be, if you ever find yourself magically transported back to 18th century Russia, do yourself a favor and have a clean shave. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to let me know what you thought in the comments below, and leave suggestions for what I should cover next time.